we, since in this last year, we've had, I don't know, probably over a dozen, maybe like 2 dozen people come through with COVID that had to be intubated. It was bad enough that they had to have respiratory support. And every single one of them passed away. Like, we've had one guy that just barely made it. He's still in the hospital, but he was successfully extubated. We got the tube out and he's still alive, which hasn't happened yet. Like to go into that environment every day and just like have to, you know, wipe up their spit or change their diapers or go into the room to sweep the floor, like housekeeping and stuff, like everybody, to work in the environment where people are willing to like put themselves out there and put that much on the line to like take care of people who can't take care of themselves and who would otherwise not have, I don't know, like COVID is a horrible death. Like, people die horrible deaths from it. And being able to work with the people that are willing to do that, like, it changes your perspective, you know, it humbles you and it makes you just want to be better and work harder and do more for the next guy, you know.
You're listening to the Reed Fletcher podcast. Today I got to talk with Wyatt Boles. He is my uncle, and he has an awesome story of what he's doing right now in medical school. Joined the Airforce, has been doing medical school through the Airforce. Actually is doing residency right now, is kind of finishing up. He lives on the military base, but he lives in an RV that him and his wife have completely remodeled so that they're not having to pay a mortgage. Not only that, he did it all by hand, him and his wife, and they've got 5 kids all in this RV, and they're finishing medical school. And it's just, he's got a cool story. He kind of goes into the politics, the dynamics, and everything of the healthcare system, the personalities of doctors, you know, corruption, things like that, and some stories about his experiences and everything. So it's really interesting, and I hope you enjoy it. It's a little bit different than what I've done in the past, so I really liked it. Just talking about, you know, medical field and everything like that, but it's very intriguing, and I hope you enjoy. Here with Wyatt. How you doing, Wyatt? Thanks for jumping on.
Good. How you doing, man?
Good.
Sweet.
I'm seeing some beautiful scenery. You said you're in California, right?
Yeah. Yep. It's this is our backyard. We're living in an RV park right now, so it's nice. It's nice to get out in the mornings. But
No, why did you
yeah,
decide to do an RV park? I think I've heard a little bit about this story.
yeah. It was kind of a long time coming. So my wife has always wanted to she's always wanted to do like a tiny home. It's been her like dream ever since we got married. And we weren't sure if we could hack it. So tiny homes are you kind of have to have somewhere that you can like put it, right?
Yeah.
And we've talked about off and on different places that we've moved. We've talked about getting like a tiny home or something like that. But when we moved from Washington to California, we were coming from one residency program to the military, and we didn't have enough money for like first and last month rent and a deposit and all of that. So we opted to just get an RV and a pickup and have that be our mortgage and not pay rent or anything and see how it worked. So we bought this brand new RV because Hailey was sketched out about the idea of like pooping in someone else's toilet, essentially.
Yeah.
So we bought a brand new RV while we were still in Washington. and I came home from work and she had ripped out the entire interior of the RV. She had just like gutted it because she wanted, I mean, she had her idea of what it was supposed to be like, and um apparently it wasn't anything like what she wanted. So
So she
we just,
gutted a brand new RV?
yeah, yeah. It was pretty, we had some like moments of just breathing there for a second when I came home and saw just all of the cabinets, like everything was torn out and on the driveway. And she was like, I need you to throw that in the garbage for me. I was like, okay. And then it was my job then to like rebuild it, put it all back together the way that she had like in her mind.
Right.
And anyway, so that's where we're at. She wanted like a chandelier, like, so we figured out how to wire up a chandelier for her, stuff like that. So
Wow.
she had big goals of like turning this into a house. She wanted like hardwood floors, so we found some like old hardwood floors. Like it's a quarter of a normal room, so it was easy to just find kind of some scrap hardwood and refinish the floors and stuff like that. So
Did you do all
it's a
the
lot.
finishing yourself or did you hire it out?
I've done it all myself. We we did get like granite countertops, and that one, like, we just hired some guy to put in, but everything else I've just kind of done myself. So it's fun. I mean, but it was a little bit crazy. But we did it, like, the reality is, like, we did it to get out of debt. So when I was in med school and then going into residency was like a really tough transition. Um, and I didn't, anyway, it's a little bit complicated, but I didn't get into the program that I wanted. And so I ended up scrambling, is what they call it, to try and find a new program. And I didn't match in that scramble either, which is really expensive. Like, it's tens of thousands of dollars to do. And then moving, when we've moved every year for the last, I don't know, like 5 or 6 years. So moving expenses and all of that, we were strapped and didn't have any like room in the budget. So we just threw it all on credit cards and we were like, we'll figure this out later. Um, so we uh had like, I think it was like $30,000 on credit cards that we had to pay off, and then
Oof.
a new truck, not a new truck, but like a truck and an RV that we had to pay off. Anyway, we just made the last payment like a couple of days ago. So we have like gotten out of all of that debt and everything, saved a ton of money. It's been really good. It's been, I mean, there have definitely been days, right, with 5 kids in an RV. But like, I remodeled their bedrooms so they all have like bunks and everything. And I don't know, it's worked out. Highly always kind of says that you have as many good days in a house as you do in an RV, like, and as many bad days. Like, you just kind of bring your attitude to it.
Yeah.
So,
Dang. So, do you feel like looking back, do you feel like it was the right decision now?
oh yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, and you know, I'm glad that we got a little bit aggressive with like taking things apart. So before Highly tore it all apart, we did take it out like for an overnight camping trip just to see. And I was like, let's see how much of this we can save. And um the reality was, like, they're really built out of pretty flimsy wood. Um and they don't hold up to a whole lot of abuse. And ours had 2 bathrooms, so we took out one of the bathrooms because Highly just didn't want to deal with the kids destroying it and not cleaning it ever. So, um, and then I don't know, there were just like things that, like, we realized when we were out on the camping trip that we were like, this is just not going to work if we're going to be here for 3 years. At the time, we were kind of thinking 1 year, But once we hit a year, we were like, this isn't that bad at all. So let's just keep doing it. So
Man, I think it's awesome. I always look for creative ways to not pay the mortgage and get out of debt. We're actually doing that right now.
oh
Um,
yeah,
not an RV, which I think is
right.
awesome, but we live upstairs and we Airbnb out our basement.
Oh, nice.
For the same reason. We're like, well, especially with our first home, we're like, we don't want to get into all this debt. And then in addition to that, be paying the mortgage and like,
Right.
so what we did was we found a home that we really liked, a neighborhood we really liked, and we just live upstairs. We have like their own entrance. They live in the basement. They have their own door. And we did a bunch of remodeling too. And yeah, it's it's a lot more expensive and time consuming than than you think before you go in. I'm sure you had more
Yeah.
experience than me, but like yeah, I can imagine. How much square footage did you have to do?
I don't even I don't even know. It's a 32-foot long RV, but that includes like the trailer hitch and stuff. It's probably like 8 feet wide by like 20 something feet. And then, you know, I don't know, you've got to subtract out like the built-in beds and countertop. And anyway,
Did you
I don't
keep the
know. It's
beds? Did you upgrade them or anything?
no, yeah, we totally upgraded the beds. The mattresses were pretty just cheap foam stuff. So
Yeah, because they're
um,
not like I mean I've slept in RVs and it's not bad, but it's not designed like it's designed for like a weekend trip usually, like the
right,
mattresses.
right.
Um, what did you keep the same layout? Like how because you have 5 kids, right?
Yeah.
How do they sleep? Is it bunks?
Yeah. So it came with two bunks. Like it was like two bunks on one side and a bathroom on the other side, just like not like a full bathroom, like a toilet and a sink. So we ended up taking out that bathroom and building three bunks inside of that bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
And then the kids got bigger, actually, which didn't see that coming when we bought it, was like growth spurts and stuff. But then we ended up taking out the walls to that bathroom and like building in, some solid uh, beds around just in that area. So now they've got two bunks on one side and then three bunks on the other side. Um, we did get like kid mattresses, and then but they weren't like the spring kind. They were some type of foam that we were able to fit to the right size, but they weren't like the really thin, cheap stuff. They're pretty decent. And then Hiley and I, um, just ours. So a typical RV queen size mattress is a little bit small. So we ended up taking out some storage stuff and expanding the size of our bed area. So now it just fits a normal queen size, and we just bought a like purple queen size mattress. It's for Hiley's back and stuff. Like she has pretty specific types of mattresses she likes, but that's how we went with it. But we just kind of expanded until we could fit what we needed or figure out how to fit things. But
I think that's so awesome. It's funny because as a kid, as a dad, you might be tempted to think like, oh man, like I need specific things my kids are gonna want, and like they maybe they expect a house or whatever. But the reality is, as a kid, it's probably awesome. Like I would have loved that.
yeah,
It sounds like a dream. I mean, it's probably great for you guys too. But as a kid, I would have loved to live in an RV. I remember visiting them and thinking they were so cool. And like,
yeah.
is it mobile? Like, can you still like get around and move and stuff?
Yeah, so we actually have to move every 6 months. There's an RV park on base that we stay at 6 months out of the year, and we like it there because it's cheaper. it's only like $700 a month to rent a spot there, and then they have like free utilities and everything. But they only let you stay there for 6 months. So every 6 months we come out here to this place. This is off base. Um, and here it is $1,700 a month for a piece of dirt, and you pay for your own utilities. So
Oh,
yeah, it's pretty rough. But um, like average rent for like a small apartment is like 3,000. So we're saving kind of a lot by being here.
yeah. You did
Um,
the more expensive one quite a bit.
yeah, yeah. Um, I mean, it averages out to about like, I don't remember. We did the math, but I think it was like about 900 or 1,000 um, throughout the course of the year once we add in like saving utilities and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, and then the kids have like this whole, like there's a pond back here behind me. There's like trees and like swampy areas, and they we taught them like how to build little teepees, like lash together some sticks and stuff, and they built a couple of little teepees, and we slept out here the other night. And I mean, it's just they spend all their time out here. It's kind of like, you were saying, you kind of as a parent, you want to give them like everything and whatever, but like they're happy with a stick and a rock and a couple of trees. So
I know it's like our baby, he's 9 months right now. And so he's like, he does, he's a little baby, but it's so funny because like for Christmas, we were all excited and we had Christmas in Utah, right? We live in Arizona. And so we brought all these presents and stuff. And when we got there, we gave him all these presents, which in hindsight is kind of silly, like has no idea what's going on. And he just wanted to play in the wrapping paper, like doesn't care about
yeah,
anything. And it's just fun. A lot of it, is like self-indulgent as a parent. You're like, I want to
right,
feel like I'm being a good parent, or it's just fun. But the
yeah,
kid, I
yeah,
mean, whatever you do is their only life. They don't know.
right, right, yeah. um that was one thing, going from a house to an RV is like you have to just simplify everything. So the kids all got like one toy. um Eventually that turned into like a basket once we had like space for it. But they have like their little gear, like their little adventure gear and stuff like that, and they have places that they can keep that. But we, for Christmas, like this was something that Hailey and I came up with when Adelaide was really little, and um, she didn't care what we gave her.
Hmm.
We kind of came up with this thing where we just do 3 presents for Christmas. So they get like one bought present, and then one made present. And Hailey and I flip flop every year what we make them. And then, or like who makes it, like Hailey makes it one year and then I make it the next year. And then one present that brings them closer to Christ to kind of help, focus on the season or whatever. So like journals and books and stuff like that. And it's been really good. Like uh they kind of, they don't expect more. And they take better care of the things that they do get, and it gives us a better chance to kind of um get to know them a little bit, because if we're only getting them one present, we're not like spamming them with whatever we can think of that
Hmm.
they might like. We're just like, it's a little more careful the way that we go about it.
It's kind of a slippery slope when you really start going all out in presents because it's hard to backtrack.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, well, last year you took us to Disneyland and bought us sleds and MP3s, and like this year all I got was this, like dumb Skechers shoe, and
Right, right.
especially for little kids, it's tough. You set the precedent and they kind of just, not just little kids. I mean, it's funny. Me and Maddie have thought about this too. Right when we got married was right after I got paid for summer sales, and we
Uh-huh.
were freshly married and still kind of getting to know each other. And so like our first anniversary, we like went to Lululemon and like bought all these and like went to Disneyland. And it's just because I had just gotten all the money that I worked for like 4 months, so it was
Right.
a big paycheck all at once. And then it like sets a precedent, and then every year you're like, maybe we should like, maybe we should have started low, and then when we get to our 50th anniversary, it'll be like, hey, look how big this is. But I think we're
Right.
we're living in reverse. We're like
Yeah.
Benjamin Button, and
There
every
you
year
go.
we're getting younger.
Yeah. No, yeah, we did that for sure. Like and we kind of screwed up because we did like we flip-flopped every other one. So if I do the anniversary, excuse me, if I do the anniversary this year, then Hailey does it next year. So then it became like a one-upper, like, oh well, you did this last year, so like now I'm gonna do this year. And
Uh-huh.
it blew up. Like it ended when Hailey paid for us to go to Hawaii when we didn't have any money. So it was like, actually, no. After that, she still bought me a truck. So I mean, it got a little bit nuts. But we
Yeah,
have since backpedaled.
it
And
does happen. In fact, we actually just got back from Hawaii for anniversary just last week. That's where we were.
yeah,
And yeah, we're kind of thinking like, maybe we should. Luckily, because of COVID, like it was a crazy deal.
yeah,
Um,
right,
to go to Hawaii right now is only $250, which is
yeah,
like crazy. But it's really funny. There's a weird thing that goes on, when you get presents from your spouse, because it's like the same pool of money, so it's kind of
right,
like buying it for
exactly,
yourself.
right, yep, for sure,
And so it's like, would I have spent money on this? And a lot of times, it's really great stuff. It's just weird when you think about it that way, because it's not just like
yeah,
this thing appeared out of nowhere. It's like,
right.
I am kind of paying for this, aren't I?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it takes a lot of like, I don't know, just open conversations to kind of hash out like, should we really have done that? Like, because now it becomes like once the gift is given, it's like a we thing, right? But
Yeah.
yeah,
I remember for Christmas, my brother Robert was notorious for like he bought these really awesome presents for my parents that were just totally for him. Like he bought my parents the Lord of the Rings trilogy on special edition extended, whatever, and gave it to my
uh-huh.
parents, and it was like, oh, that's nice. I guess we can all sit down and watch this later.
That's so funny. Yeah, I've tried to pull that a couple of times with Hailey, just kind of like, you really want this saw so that I can finish your like projects or whatever, but it's never gone well.
That's so funny.
Yeah,
That's such a yeah. And it is weird. I mean, it's not weird. Like you get to a point where it's not weird. Probably is not the right word, but it's very different than when you're dating, or very different than like with a friend. Where if I get a
yeah,
gift from a friend, the fact that they gave me anything is just like, wow, like you thought of me. Like this thing just materialized out of nowhere. I never would have had whatever the heck this is.
right,
But when it's
right.
your own family, it's kind of like, okay, I guess we'll bring this home, and I'll wear this shirt as often as you want me to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly, for sure. That shirt looks great on you. Well, I wouldn't ever buy it, but I guess we'll get it. Yeah, for sure. That's funny.
Now, how old is your oldest?
She's 9. So we have a 9, 8, twin 6-year-olds, and a 5-year-old.
What? How long do you think you'll stay in the RV? What's the plan?
So the plan is, so we're actually almost done with residency. So we're going to be leaving in about a year, little over a year. So um, we're going to spend the next 4 months here because that's how much time we have until we can get back on base. And then we'll do 6 months on base. And then we're actually going to move into just temporary housing and kind of fix up the RV, finish up whatever, we need to finish, probably repaint it, and then sell it at that point. Because the plan, not necessarily set in any kind of stone yet, is to go overseas um, once I finish residency. So in another year or so, we'll know which base we'll be going to. Highly really wants Korea. I'm not a huge fan of Korea, so I want Japan or Guam or something like that, but we'll see. Depending on where we go, we may be able to get like a follow on to like a different base. So some of the places that you go, depending on if you get it or not, they'll give you that base, and then you also get to select like the base you go to after that.
Oh,
So we could do like 2 years in Japan or Korea, and then like 2 years in Italy or Germany or something like that. That's kind of the direction that Hailey is wanting to go. But I'll do 4 more years in the Air Force after I finish residency. And at this point, we're just kind of like, let's go wherever. Let's just use the Air Force to pay for our, Europe trip or Europe travels or whatever, and see how it goes. But
yeah, man, what an adventure, man. How does it how does it work? So, I guess I'm a little confused by it. So, like, you were in the Air Force, not doing anything medical. Then the Air Force paid for your medical school, and now you're doing medical for the Air Force. Is that right?
yeah, so I only joined after I had gotten accepted to medical school.
Okay.
Um, when I was like a pre-med student and trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, all the advice that I got. So it was right around the time that the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, was really like coming out, and everybody was finding out all these like crazy things about it and how it was affecting doctors.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the doctors that I worked with said, um, like, don't get into medicine unless you have a game plan for how to pay for it. Some of the people that I was working with were like $500,000 in debt and living off of 75 or 80,000 a year. They were like, there's no way
Gosh.
we're ever going to get through this. So there, there are a couple of like debt relief systems out there, but um, I don't know. My dad was in the Navy. Um, my both of my grandparents were in like the Army, and it's kind of not really a tradition, I guess, but it's just something that we um, always grew up listening to, was stories. And my little brother served in the Marines, so I opted to like serve time in the Air Force to kind of just support the freedoms that we have and stuff. So I ended up uh, getting into medical school, and at that point, one of the best options was just join the Air Force, join the military, and I opted for the Air Force because they had more. It was just more family friendly. So joined the Air Force um, like weeks before I went to medical school, and then they didn't really touch me. I did like a month of training between semesters at school, and otherwise they didn't have anything to do with me. They just wanted me to graduate was all they cared about. So after I graduated from medical school, then the Air Force gets to tell you more or less what to do. So you have to go through uh, a residency program, to basically decide your specialty. And since the Air Force paid for your med school, then they get kind of first dibs on what you are allowed to apply for. So I really wanted pediatrics. Like peds is my jam. I love working with little babies, and um, so I applied for pediatrics, and I got into what's called like a civilian deferral spot, meaning they wanted me in pediatrics, but they didn't have a spot available for me in the military residencies.
Mm-hmm.
So that was where everything fell apart. Um, and I ended up not making it into any programs. And then this program from my school called. Like at this point, we're desperate, right? We're really like praying our guts out, trying to figure out what we're supposed to do. Because I'm essentially qualified. Like I'm a doctor, right? Like I've received my doctorate degree, but I am not allowed to do anything with it. So I'm as qualified as, we're going back to work at Walmart or whatever. So it was a rough, like it was brutal to get to that point. So I finish um that whole process, and this out of the middle of nowhere, my school calls me and says that they are submitting my name to this program, and this other program had accepted a student from my school who didn't pass her boards, so she wasn't able to do that, or like join their program. So the Air Force, since I didn't qualify with the Air Force, they put me on a leave of absence, which basically means like get your life figured out and we'll readdress in a year.
Mm-hmm.
um, so I accepted this spot and went to a family medicine program up in Washington. I did a year up there, but because I was still, half dependent on the Air Force, I had to reapply um, through the Air Force program. And basically, I was just appealing. I was like, look, I'm already in a program. Please just don't make me do that again. Like, I'll just stay here. And the Air Force, it all comes down to like needs of the Air Force. And so they decided that they they weren't going to fill all of their spots for family medicine, which was what I was applying for at that point. So they pulled me from that program and put me into this program that I'm in right now. And honestly, like it was really good. It was a good transition. I didn't want to do family medicine necessarily, but I um didn't want it for the wrong reasons. And now that I'm in it, like I'm glad I'm doing family, because I still get to do everything that I wanted to, and then some. As a family doc, as a pediatrician, I would have been pretty limited to um, what I was able to do. So that's kind of the process. Like, and then um, once we came from that Washington program, that was a civilian program, just like a filler for a year to try and make some money. We got paid for that time versus doing free research to try and boost my application again.
Mm-hmm.
So it was good. And then it was good to have that perspective too, to see the civilian world and see how like medicine is so different between the military and the civilian world. Like we have way different priorities and way different expectations, and everything works differently. So I can kind of self-teach as I go through the Air Force to prepare for the civilian side of things once I'm done, and not just be blindsided, because um I don't know, that's kind of the hard thing, is going from one train of thought to having to completely flip it to something else as far as what you're focused on. Because we don't deal with insurances, we don't deal with malpractice, we don't deal with anything other than, and we get to use all the like latest and greatest meds, brand name everything we want. We still have to, go through like an authorization system, but it's so different from, working with like the really poor people, the homeless, the drug addicts that, they can't even afford like the $2 a month at Walmart kind of medications. Um, anyway, so it's kind of, it's really good now at this point because I can practice medicine in like the ideal way, right? I know all of the the depth of medical knowledge that I can get, and I don't have to be worried about like, is this patient going to eat today or pay for their meds? Is, like, what can I do to kind of, I don't know, do this for free for the patient, or as free as possible, which is kind of how residencies around the country are. We just take care of the really poor people in order to be able to help them out.
Mm-hmm.
um, and we're residents, so the hospitals get away with paying us a lot less than the actual attendings. So anyway, that part of it's been really good. And then being able to kind of as well think like, what am I actually costing the system by doing some of the things that some of my colleagues do, is just like willy-nilly order whatever. And you just kind of take a step back and kind of think of different ways to manage things by kind of applying your civilian brain to it. But
Now, could you stay in the military? Could you continue to practice medicine in the military if you want to, or is it just like a term, and then once the term is over, then you have to go to civilian?
I could stay. And by the end of a career, it balances out about how much you make. Um, between them paying for medical school and everything else, like, you would make, by the time you hit like 20 years, you would make about the same amount as a civilian doctor.
Mm-hmm.
My trouble is, um, I didn't realize how rough it would be to have them tell me like what to do with my free time. Um, so you can continue in the Air Force for as long as you want. The I guess there's two things. One is, the longer you're in, the more they just put you in administrative positions and you don't actually see patients. So patient care for 90% of doctors is everything we want to do. We don't really want to do the administrative stuff. There are a few that really like paperwork, and that's their jam. So they're the ones that stick around and stick it out, for those higher up positions, higher ranking positions like colonel and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
um but like, man, with this COVID thing, I did not realize. So they put a 350-mile limit on Air Force member travel, and that's been in place since March of last year.
Like
The
a
only
radius?
Yeah. So we're not allowed to travel outside of 350 miles. um if we want to, then we have to go through this appeal process that is long and tedious, and unless somebody in your family is dying, like, they typically don't approve it. So because the Air Force is trying to protect us, right? So trying to keep their resources available for deployments and whatever else. So they don't allow us to go out and get exposed anywhere to COVID.
Right.
So I don't know, man. Like, there's so many limits on, like, we can't just jump in the car and drive to Utah and go see family or whatever, or like go up to Washington and visit friends, or go, even to Southern California and go to Disneyland, unless we have like really crazy specific, uh, long processes in place to be able to do that. And I know it's like COVID specific, but that's a year. And I've been doing this for like a year and a half. So that's like the majority of my experience in the Air Force is having that restriction. So I don't know. That's been the hard part.
Yeah.
And
I didn't realize that they had so much say and control in your medical career. Like, I guess I'd never really thought about it, but you were saying that you wanted to be in a specific program, and they were
mhm.
like, "Hey, we don't need pediatrics. You need to do this," and you couldn't say no to that. Like, you didn't really have a say.
um, let's see. By the second round, I didn't want to say no. I just wanted a spot, you know, because I spent easily $10,000 or $15,000 trying to um, get in the first time.
Hmm.
It's expensive and it's heartbreaking when you don't get in, and just excruciating.
When you say get in, do you mean get in specifically to a pediatric program or?
Yeah, get into a program. Like if you so once I didn't get into peds, um, I tried scrambling. And that's basically where every open program with a spot puts their name on a list, and you can like call them or email them or whatever, but then you have to send in like application fees and all this stuff to be able to get your application in front of them. And that was like hundreds. Like I sent my application to hundreds of programs. Um, but again, like I did it wrong and it was late and I didn't know enough about the system to do it right. I should have probably like talked to some mentor about it, but like I don't even I don't even know how you would go about finding someone who had been through that process to kind of talk you through it, you know?
Yeah.
So I just went for it. And um anyway, it didn't work out. But so technically you can tell the Air Force, I'm only going to do this and I'm not going to do anything else. But the risk that you run with that is that you don't get to do it. So the Air Force always has the option to pull you into what's called a transitional year, and you do basically 1 year of residency after you've graduated, and then they can put you in as what's called a GMO, a general medical officer. So you're like an untrained doctor. You have a degree, but you don't have any of like the specialty training or anything like that. And then they have you for 4 years in that position. You spend 4 years basically doing physical exams, like sports physical kind of stuff on on pilots and like the healthiest people in the world, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a rough job. Your skills get really just terrible, kind of beat up after that. And you still have to reapply for residency. You still have to start over with the residency process. Only now you're 4 years out of medical school, 5 years technically, because you have that first year. It's been 5 years and you've kind of let a lot of your skills lapse a little bit, you know? So it gets, it almost gets harder to get into your desired specialty. Like if you wanted orthopedics, right?
Hmm.
Or dermatology is really hard to get into. There's only a few spots in the Air Force, like 2 or 3 spots for um, all of the thousands of students that are applying for residency programs. So if you're not like the top two applicants, you're not going to get into dermatology, you know?
Hmm.
But if you're like, that's it, I'm dead set, I'm never going anywhere but dermatology, like you're going to be a GMO, you're going to spend your time as a flight doc, you're going to, and then good luck after that, you know? Like
Yeah.
either you spend your entire time as a flight doc honing your dermatologic skills so that by the time you reapply, you have something to show for it, or you just kind of settle into one of the programs that is kind of like, so family medicine is kind of a catch-all because we can work a hospital, we can do the emergency room, we can do pediatrics, we can do like OB delivery stuff, we can do regular clinic, we can do old people, old retirees, and everything like that. We can kind of cover everything. So it's one of the specialties that the Air Force really just has a million spots for. They're like, anybody can do this. But the
Wait, what is
reality
it
is,
called?
family medicine,
Oh, family medicine is what you're just talking about, where you can do like they've got a
just the
bunch of
whole
spots for it.
spectrum. Yeah, yeah. Versus like dermatology, where they only need a few dermatologists to cover the whole Air Force. And then um, anybody with like a significant skin condition can basically just go to that base and get their visit. And does that make sense?
Yeah,
Like they don't need, like 90% of the Air Force doesn't have dermatology problems,
right.
but like 100% of the Air Force needs like physical exams and blood pressure medication and whatever else. So
Are there fields that don't exist in the Air Force?
yeah, it's not so much that it doesn't exist, it's just that it's rare enough that they like farm out to civilian programs.
Right.
So like, I don't know, there's a lot of subspecialties. So for example, like right now we don't have a spine doctor. um we just refer off to a civilian orthopedic spine doctor. We don't have um what else? Oh, like pediatric stuff. um so pediatric cardiology, pediatric like orthopedics, um all of those guys, um we just refer to like UC Davis or UCSF. They have big like pediatric hospital facilities that have all the subspecialists, so we just send them there.
Now, is it a totally different thing? It's probably an ignorant question, but like actual combat medical field, like is that like the combat medics, is that its own field?
Yeah, so medics are like paramedics is kind of the way to think about it. So
Right.
they get very specific training on um I don't know. It was funny. I was talking to one of them, and so like basically anybody that gets shot in the chest is at risk for something called a tension pneumothorax, meaning the lung deflates and then the whole chest cavity shifts over to one side, and it can kill people, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the way to relieve it is you put in a needle kind of into the in between the ribs, and it allows air in to kind of balance the chest cavity a little bit. Um, and or I guess I have that backwards. It inflates too much and there's no release for the air. So either way, you put in these needles, but um, in medicine, like you have a chest x-ray, you have like very specific reasons for doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then anytime you put in one of those needles, you follow it with a chest tube, which is like a tube that you put on suction, and it helps the lung heal. Anyway, this lady was saying like, oh yeah, just anybody that ever like gets shot in the chest, we just put two needles right in their chest, and doesn't matter what they've got going on. It's like, I mean, it's like a totally different, just cowboy style of like, this is probably what is going to kill them, if anything's going to kill them. So get the needles in, and it doesn't really matter. So anybody that got on her helicopter got two needles in their chest for possible lung decompression. But
Just like because she'd rather, it's most likely this is the problem. I'd rather just, I don't have the time to really do it like a full assessment. And
or the resources, right? Like they're in the field. So they basically take whatever could possibly be the absolute worst, try and fix that or prevent that, transfer them via helicopter or plane or whatever to a medical facility, and we pull the needles out and we put in like chest tubes, or we do like the definitive management. um by we, I mean, like, the doctors versus medics is kind of the distinction there. There's a lot less medical decision making, and a whole lot more just like, these are like the 10 things that you need for every person that's in some sort of like dire circumstances that we could deal with.
I
So
wonder the psychological and like actual combat readiness training that they have to go through, because being in that stressful of a situation, and you said it makes sense that they only have 10 things, right? It's like, um, obviously a doctor is still high stakes, and it's still like your decisions are going to affect someone's health. So it's always a big deal. But it seems like a medic, like specifically a combat medic, it's like I can't have a whole binder, of options here because it's combat, and I can make split second decisions, and I basically just need to take the fastest, simplest way to get this person to where we can make better decisions.
right. Yep. Yeah, so I mean, um that's the game paramedics play all the time. I did some of my training in rural Idaho, and I worked with an ER doc. He was really good, and he would have as many paramedics as could make it over to his house, and he would just do these trainings on, this is why you're giving aspirin to somebody with chest pain, or like, this is why you like you can't, I mean, if someone's having like facial droop and they're concerning for a stroke, like, this is why you can't slow down, like, just get them as fast as you can and skip this hospital and this hospital and take them straight to that one because it's the only one that has the specialists able to deal with it, kind of a thing. And it was really good. I mean, it was really cool. But I think that's where the kind of the two worlds run into each other, is like, and honestly, like, if you wanted to break it down even further, like, that's the difference between doctors and PAs, or doctors and nurse practitioners too. Like, nurse practitioners and PAs can nurse practitioners especially can practice on the same level as an independent physician, and PAs can practice under the license of a physician and theoretically do the same things. But that's where the difference is they don't have the training in like the why. They don't understand. They may understand, like, I don't know, you give Tylenol for a cold, for example, but like, they don't understand the mechanism of action and the expected kind of like, when can we push it, when can we go a little bit higher on the dose or a little bit lower. And with time and experience and training, like, you know nurse practitioners do fine. But it's funny because I see a lot of PAs. There was a PA school that's part of our medical school, and they were always like, we can do the exact same things you can do, like, we can do it just as good as you, and whatever. And it's like, okay, like, yes, you are legally able to, but like, why are you doing it?
Mm-hmm.
um and in like day to day whatever, it doesn't necessarily affect things a whole lot. But in like hospital medicine, when it comes down to, you're managing like 6 or 7 different pretty complicated processes, and you have to understand like, why this medication and not that medication. um it becomes a lot more important.
So is
Um,
it more of an understanding of like the chemical makeup of things, or is it like the anatomy that you delve deeper into? Like why would one know more about the why than the other?
so we do, yeah, I mean, it's all of that. Um, we basically do, in medical school, we do 4 years, and PA school, and let's see, so it's 2 years of like chemistry, biochemistry, like pharmacology, anatomy, um, all of that kind of stuff. And PAs, depending on the school, typically get 1 year of that. And then um, we do like 2 years of clinical, um, bouncing around to different specialties and having the subspecialists like teach us the differences of like the subtleties and the nuances of medicine. And they do that for 1 year as PAs. Um, and then they're done. And then they're able to go practice. But then we do 4 years, well, depending on your specialty, right? So 3 years of family medicine, 3 years for like peds or something like that, and up to like 6 years for surgeons, um, of this postgraduate training. And that's when you really learn everything. Like that's when you realize like you have no idea what you're doing, and um, you think you're doing something right because you saw somebody do this one time, but then because of the like the subtleties of this current situation, your supervising doc is like, you're an idiot, what are you doing? And then you're like, no, I saw this once, I promise. And they're like, no, 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 you're gonna kill somebody. That kind of stuff is what they are missing. And then just the like unbelievable hours of working all day every day and thinking. It's funny, there's something called a golden weekend, which is when you get 2 days off for the weekend, and everybody's like, you mean like a normal weekend, right? And it's like, no, 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 this is a golden weekend. This is like, this is the best thing ever. But anyway, so that's kind of some of the nuances that we just get, probably twice as much of like the normal training, and then we have a residency on top of it.
One
And that
thing
like,
I'm kind of coming to understand that I didn't realize was that medicine isn't quite as much of an exact science as I thought it was. Like there's a lot that goes in discretion, right? And instinct, I would guess.
yeah,
Is that pretty fair to say like different doctors would see the same objective medical issue and think of completely different problems it could be and also ways to resolve it. It's, as me, someone who knows basically nothing about medicine, like you go into a doctor and you assume that it's like going into, like a McDonald's, or like, hey, I want to order
mm-hmm.
this burger. It doesn't matter if I'm ordering it in Wisconsin or in California, like it's the same burger. Um, but I'm kind of figuring out, especially going through a pregnancy, that medicine is a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more like, yeah, I guess just driven by people's preferences and understandings and stuff like that, and specific doctors.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I don't know, we all try and do what's called evidence-based medicine, meaning like we use as much information as we have out there on every different possible subject, right? And we have a lot of different resources that we can go to look for evidence, to try and find like what the most what the best information is for the patient. But then every patient's different, and every situation is a little bit different. And um I don't know, I've got part of our program, we manage different what we call continuity patients. They're OB patients that um we just follow them through their whole pregnancy and the delivery, and then postpartum, help them with that. And every single one of them is different, and every single one of them is managed just a little bit differently. And some of them are a little more complicated, need a little bit different kind of hand holding. There is like the algorithm, right, that you just work through. Like at this many weeks we order this, and at this many weeks we order this, and you kind of work through that way to make sure you don't miss anything. But it's different when they're 35 versus 30 years old, or
Yeah.
it's different when they're obese versus not obese. And it just, like, the little things are what you don't want to miss. um a lot of it's like training yourself to, it's like you were saying, like, it's training your instincts. That's probably the biggest thing that residency does, is it trains you when to have like the heebie jeebies about something about this seems weird, versus like, um no, you're fine, like it's just the cold, everything's fine, kind of a thing.
Hmm. I think as a
But
society, we put doctors in almost like a shaman type role, especially the general public like me that doesn't really know, where it's like we hike up the mountainside to visit the shaman, and he'll just tell us everything about our future, and he's all knowing, and we can go back and feel good. And obviously the knowledge, the practice, the schooling and all that does um, add a level, of course, of knowing what can help people. But it's like it's not as perfect, right? I mean, like, doctors
yeah,
um,
yeah,
and I don't know. I guess there's a lot. I think of any profession. I honestly think of any profession. Doctors have like the trump card. Like, they are like the end all authority. Because if you think about like a billionaire CEO or like a professional athlete, really the only people they answer to is a doctor. The doctor is like the king of the land. And it's
that's
kind of
funny.
funny, that you realize that they're not perfect, and that they have so much discretion. And some doctors are probably, I mean, just like anything, a lot worse. And some probably don't care as much as others, like they just more empathetic or more detail oriented. Strange to
Yeah,
think of.
yeah, it's funny, and like the different personalities that come out in different programs or different specialties too. So like, I don't know, like ER docs are always the jocks, and orthopedists are like always the rich jocks, like, and let's see, like, some of these I shouldn't say, but peds are always like warm fuzzy kind of people, like they just, everybody loves pediatricians. um Dermatologists are funny because they just want to be like, they make more money than all of us, but they just want to be liked by everyone. So I don't know,
They kind of
man,
like
like,
the outcast, like dermatology is like their own, like the pariah.
it's like the one that everybody wishes we could do, but since not everybody makes those kind of grades, like,
Is it
so
harder?
few
I
people get
didn't
to
know
do.
that.
Dermatology makes the most money, and like, you can, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but they make the most money, and they have the best lifestyle, and everybody
Hmm.
wants to be a dermatologist.
What
But
determines what makes the most money? Is it the cost of care or the cost of school? Just how difficult it is?
it's actually just, it all comes down to insurance. So insurance, okay, we may get into a tangent on insurance, because that is, um to a certain extent, the bane of the medical system right now.
Right.
But um basically, dermatologists do procedures all day. So if you come in with a wart and they freeze it off for 10 seconds, they just did a procedure, and they can bill for a procedure, but they just barely saw you. This is the first visit. that's clearly a wart. Let's clearly just freeze it right now. So they also get to bill you for an office visit. It's kind of a complicated thing. So if you see somebody and then they come back, you can only bill for one thing. You can either bill for the procedure or the office visit. But if you take care of it at the same visit and it's your first time seeing them, they're not coming specifically for that. They're just coming for the first evaluation. You can bill for two, for both the evaluation and the procedure. So it gets a little bit complicated, but the point is, like, they do procedures all day, like, and they typically will see their patients a couple of times unless they're, coming in for full body skin exams or something like that. So like if you have a family history of like melanoma, for example, they recommend that you just get a yearly once over to make sure you don't have any concerning spots. But beyond that, like, their day to day is like, hey, this is the first time I've seen you. Let's, cut out that cyst, or let's, freeze off that precancerous whatever. So they're constantly doing procedures, and being able to double bill like that, which it's not double billing, right? Like, it's typically you would bill for the evaluation, and then, so like a surgeon, for example, they'll bill for the evaluation, and then the patient will be scheduled to come back for the procedure, and then they'll bill for the procedure. Dermatologists can just do that in one visit, so they can kind of knock it all out at once. So anyway, being able to use their time that way, where they're evaluating and treating at the same time, and then doing procedures on almost every patient, that just, like, they can charge insurance through the roof, essentially. So
Is there like a tension between insurance agencies and medical agencies, or is it like you're on the same team?
we're totally not on the same team. Everyone thinks we are. Everyone thinks that doctors are getting like kickbacks from the pharmaceutical companies or from insurance companies or whatever, but the reality is, like, we hate being dictated what to do. I gotta say, like, 90% of the doctors, right? There are some that are in it for the money and they'll do whatever it takes, but I would say that's like, I don't think I've personally met or worked with a doctor like that in my career. But I'm sure they're out there. But anyway, so there's like this myth that doctors get a little bit off the top, a little cheese, if we prescribe a certain expensive medication, but it's not like that. The reality is that we're trying to do things as much based on the best evidence and what's best for this particular patient under these certain circumstances. And what that is may be the most expensive medicine in the world. And that's just a conversation that we have to have with the patient and be like, look, this is the best we have. It's all we've got. And we just have to go for it. As far as insurances go, insurances are out to get us, because our job is to take their money that they're making from patients, and that, like, nobody's going to go for that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So a patient comes to us, a patient that's been paying insurance, right, for the last year, comes to me with this problem, whatever it is. And I then tell the insurance, okay, now you owe me half the money that they paid you for the year. And the insurance is never going to be happy to give up all that money, right? So they're constantly doing their best to find ways to, like, avoid paying, stuff like that. One of the things, I don't know the legal ramifications of telling you some of this stuff, but one of the things, I was working with a doctor and um, he uh, he would tell me how he charged, and it was insane. Like, I was a medical student, so I was still kind of figuring out the system, and I couldn't believe it. But if he bills, like if somebody comes into his office and he bills for a procedure, um, then he has to bill twice as high to insurance in order for insurance to be able to pay the cost of the procedure. I don't know if that makes sense. So insurance will only pay him 50% of what he asks for,
Mm-hmm.
essentially, for this particular procedure, whatever it was. I don't remember. But um and then they have these requirements. So they would he would charge people that came in and paid cash less than half of what he would charge if insurance was paying,
Mm-hmm.
not because he was making twice as much money off of insurance, but because insurance was paying him half as much as he was asking for.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that makes sense,
Yeah,
but
that does make sense. I actually,
um
I've always wondered about that. Like, I don't really know how doctors get paid, and I definitely don't know how price and pricing works. Like, obviously, the doctor has to make money, and the procedures have to pay. And not only, I mean, it's everything. It's a business, right? Like, to an extent, like you have to keep the lights on.
right.
Um, I know in some countries that's determined by the government. Like, this procedure just costs this much.
Yeah.
How does that work in the United States?
Instead of the government determining it, it's the insurance that determines it. So a doctor, I mean, cash price, you can decide what you want, right? So it's my facility, it's my instruments, it's the cost of cleaning everything, it's the cost of hiring a nurse, um, it's the cost of whatever I use for the things, and it's the cost of my time, whatever that is. And I can decide if it's cash price.
What does that
If
mean to someone
it's
who doesn't have insurance?
Yeah, if somebody just comes in and they're like, hey, I want this mole taken off, um, and like I just want to pay cash for it, like they can do that.
Is,
That's
hmm.
that's doable.
Is that common?
um
Like, wouldn't most people just use their insurance?
yeah, most people use insurance. Having insurance become mandatory has changed that a lot. So now everybody just, I mean, for the most part, everybody just kind of has to use their insurance. But my wife and I were in the position early on in our marriage that we couldn't afford insurance. It was going to be like, I don't know, 500 or 600 bucks a month, and we didn't have that for rent, let alone for insurance. So we just paid cash for everything. And we, I mean, we spent maybe $1,000 that year covering all of our medical expenses.
Hmm.
And that would have been like 2 months of insurance, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, $1,000 was a lot of money. And we had to, like, but we were happy to pay that over like paying $1,000 every 2 months to cover the exact same thing. You
Yeah.
know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it was really like, ever since then, I've been kind of hesitant to use insurance or to go back to having insurance in the Air Force. And when you're hired on as an employee, it's different, right? Um, that was before I had um, a job, essentially, like, or a career, right? I
Yeah.
just had a normal job. But now that I'm in a career, like, it still kind of zings because like they're taking that out of your paycheck, right? Like, no employer is paying for your insurance off of their profit,
Right.
right? So I don't
You're
know,
still
it kind
paying
of
for it.
burns. Yeah, you're still paying for it. So you could either have an extra 500 bucks a month and pay cash for whatever comes up. The only thing is like catastrophic stuff, right? like anything that's going to cost like $1 million ICU stay or something like that, like having catastrophic insurance is always wise. But the difference is the cost for catastrophic insurance is like $50 a month versus 500 to be able to pick up Tylenol at the store, kind of thing, So I don't know. It's just the system's all backwards. But in our system, the way that it works is the insurance decides we're going to pay this much for this procedure, or we're going to pay this much for, like, if you come into the hospital with pneumonia, for example, if it's just an acute, normal community acquired pneumonia, we expect you to stay in the hospital for this amount of time. If you stay longer than that, like, we'll pay you for like 2 days, for example. I don't know what the number is, but we'll pay you for 2 days. If you stay longer than those 2 days, then you're eating the cost of that hospital stay.
You as the doctor?
Because the hospital system itself.
Okay.
So, and if the hospital's paying you, then yes, you as a doctor. But essentially, like, you're writing it off. The hospitals come up with this like charity number at the end of the year where like all of their, overstayed hospital patients or whatever are written off as like charity. So anyway, that's kind of, so insurances are the ones that pick the number. They decide how much you are going to get for this or that procedure. And they decide whether or not they're going to pay you is another thing. But
kind of doesn't make sense in my brain. Like it's something I've never really understood, but now even more talking about it, it's like what keeps them from just squeezing doctors, or what keeps them from just way underpaying for procedures or not paying,
Yeah. I mean, nothing, honestly. There, I don't know if you remember when the Affordable Care Act first came out and mandated everyone get insurance. Private insurance went from being like $200 a month or something like that to like over $1,000 a month. And it went from people being able to afford having private insurance. So the difference between like private insurance, there's like Medicare and Medicaid and like Obamacare and stuff like that. There's like government insurance programs.
Mm-hmm.
So private insurance though always pays, it pretty much guarantees you a spot with a doctor. They typically pay more than government insurance programs. And like a business, like running a medical office as a business, you can only allow a certain number of government insurance holders in your practice,
Mm-hmm.
or else you just go bankrupt. If you go 100% off of government insurance, you never make your costs. So you have to get kind of creative on how you essentially build your business to be able to handle it. But let's see, where were they going with that? So if you have private insurance, you get access to more things. You have better access to doctors and things like that. You have better access to more name brand type meds, which can be a big difference. Sometimes the generics just don't work quite as well as the name brand. But since the cost of private insurance went to almost unachievable levels for a lot of people, now that they're kind of loosening the government mandates on insurance a little bit, going back to like the $200 a month for private insurance is never going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Once you allow them to raise that price to whatever they want, they're not going back. And it's kind of a, I don't know, kind of a scary thing. Um, from my perspective, both as a utilizer of the medical profession and as a doctor on the other side,
Mm-hmm.
because there isn't really any control, you know. It's essentially, we're using supply and demand, free market stuff to like balance it, I guess, to help the insurance companies not charge $3,000 a month, for example. They do that and no one's going to pay. But the demand or the supply became so much smaller, meaning once everybody had insurance and everyone has free access to whatever resources they want, there was a finite amount of time for every doctor. Now that time is all used up, and we still have to see everybody, right? We still have to take care of people.
Mm-hmm.
But like the dictates of who is reimbursing that time is not well monitored, because it's kind of this ambiguous, like kind of shady in the cloud, kind of like, yeah, there's insurance and somehow they're related and we just have to pay them tons of money, but then we get everything we want from the doctor, you know, because I paid my insurance, I paid my dues. And it doesn't really work like that, because like I'm not getting paid. I don't know, does that make sense? Like
Yeah,
I'm not.
it's really weird. You're exactly right. Like it's so on the one hand, if it worked 100% like a typical business, and a doctor was an entrepreneur, and then they would calculate like, okay, I have to compete against other doctors if it was just completely privatized, and they were to say, well, I have to buy this, medicine, I have to buy this machinery, pay for for the building and everything, and then make a profit on top of that and compete with other doctors. There's probably some good that would come from that, in the sense that there'd be, like you were saying, supply and demand, and their pricing would have to be less than other doctors, or their practice would have to be better. The problem that I see with that too is certain incentives, like any business, like maybe the doctors that are best at marketing but aren't the best doctors would have the best practices,
Mm-hmm.
or only rich people could go to the doctors, and and like they maybe it'd become too commercialized, and they'd be doctors, but it'd be, it wouldn't be about the care, it'd be about like massage beds and nice facilities or whatever.
Yeah.
But the other end it is a complicated question, and I don't pretend to have any sort of answer, but the other end is also weird, because it's like there isn't really supply and demand in a traditional sense, because it's not
Right.
competition.
Right.
And also, you're right. You have a feeling like you pay your insurance. It's just like your debt is being paid anytime you pay insurance. So it's like, sweet, I don't even have to calculate in my head, can I afford this doctor's appointment? Like, is it worth it? Because like you would with a normal business, like, can I afford to, go to Hawaii? Because you're like, well, I pay insurance. I'll just like, if I have anything, I'll go to the doctor. And
Yeah.
now doctors are eating the cost. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very complicated.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So like you're absolutely right on the aspect of like, if if it was 100% privatized, um it comes down to a marketing game, it comes down to like the nuances of business, and you don't really want that. Like you don't want doctors in it for the money. There's a new trend that's going around, I don't know if you've heard of it, but they do these IV bars where doctors will like you can pay a certain amount of money and you can just show up and they'll give you an IV. Like pick a fluid and they'll give it to you IV. And
Hmm.
it doesn't make sense. And there's no medical basis for it. People typically don't need IV fluids for no reason. Like
Uh-huh.
if you need IV fluids, there's a really specific reason for that,
Right.
you know? So it's kind of like those oxygen bars, but now it's like a medical side of it where people just want an IV. So they show up to these IV bars and the doctor gives them an IV and they sit there and receive a bag of fluids and move on with their life. But it's weird and it
That is
doesn't make
weird.
sense medically.
Uh-huh.
And it's like I was saying, like most doctors are like sketched out by that kind of stuff. But there's around the country, there's a certain percentage of doctors that are like, oh man, yeah, you want an IV? Like sit down in my chair, let me get you something,
Like a bar.
like a bar. Exactly. And it doesn't,
It's yeah. That's
I don't
very
know.
interesting.
Yeah. So you
Well,
get into like weird stuff like that where like I spent a ridiculous amount of time learning this stuff, right? So I'm going to help you understand what exactly is going on with your body and what options we have to be able to manage that. And we're going to pick what seems like the best option first, and we're going to work from there. But that gets ambiguous when money's involved. And it's like, well, the best option for you is actually the most expensive medication in the world when really, like
uh-huh.
let's throw some Tylenol on that.
It gets very interesting too because now you're incentivizing it's good for doctors to have more patients, right? So it's
Right.
actually good, one, for more people to need medical attention. So being sick, being hurt, whatever, is good in the eyes of the business. And then two, it's probably good to keep people longer than they need to if they're paying, like a result.
Right.
Like they want to,
Right. Exactly.
and there's a lot of things like that. And you're right, like the cost analysis of which products to use becomes more important than the benefit analysis of that actual person's health.
Yeah. So then, I mean, right now we're dealing on the flip side of it though, right? So if you are incentivized, so like insurance, for example, right? They'll pay, let's say 3 days for a pneumonia. If you can get that patient out in 2 days, you just made an extra day's worth of money,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we're incentivized to like get people out and to make them look sicker than they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Again, this goes back to like ethics and stuff. And I think every doctor I've ever worked with has done this appropriately, but there is a gap in the system that like when I was working in the civilian world, they were 100% focused on put every diagnosis that that patient has had on their problem list because they're all complicating their current situation. So if they have a history of asthma and they're there for a pneumonia, that complicates the pneumonia. It makes the pneumonia sicker, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
If they're obese, that complicates things. If they're malnourished, that complicates things. Um, and you want to make sure that you have that entire spectrum so that they look as sick as they actually are. And you don't think it's just a simple pneumonia when it's really got a lot of other complicating factors. The problem though is you can make patients look much sicker. You can add extra things theoretically, right? And that's where it doesn't really matter in the Airforce. um, like we put what they're there for and that's essentially it because we don't deal with the insurance. But um, that making patients look sicker or kicking them out early when maybe they could use an extra day, and you just kind of, that's one way to recoup costs. Like, I don't know, it can get shady. um Ironically, the majority of that pressure that we get comes from hospital administration. It doesn't even come, it's not from the doctors themselves, because typically, like, we're salaried, right? We make a certain amount of money based on our putting time in, as far as hospitals go. But if we have, like, there's no benefit for me to kick a patient out a day early. Like, if the patient's still sick, like, let's keep them an extra day. But hospital administrators that run the budget, and the CFOs and people, I've had some interesting, or I've been in some interesting meetings where they're like, you need to include all these other diagnoses, and you need to, like, do they really need to be here? Like, you have a meeting every day of, like, do they need to be here in the hospital? And I don't know, like, there's just pressure, there's pressure from the people writing your paycheck to essentially move the patients out. But what was the other thing? Oh, the kind of going back to discrepancies between, like, different doctors' opinions, right? Like, I may think this patient's fine to go, and my colleague totally disagrees. And, like, for the most part, that's where, like, if you're alone, like, if you're just practicing by yourself, you're probably either really, really good and really experienced, or doing it wrong, because most people work together. Most doctors, like, have committees that we work together, and we kind of talk through, like, as residents especially, we meet at least once a week, and we pick our most complicated patients, and we say, this is what we've thought of, these are the things that we've done, what am I missing? Like, what do we need to change or add, or how can we, like, correct this? And that's all, like, off the books, right? That's us just trying to solve the problem, and doesn't have anything to do with seeing the patient, writing a note, prescribing medications, or anything like that, that technically is, like, what insurance bills for. So
Very interesting.
yeah.
I don't know. It's interesting to think about the medical world, and to think about hospitals and doctors from this perspective, because I usually don't, and most people don't. The perspective of committees, they're using their discretion. They're in some sense a business, because we understand all those things because they exist everywhere else. Like I go to work a corporate job, and I don't think in my head that when I'm going to a hospital, I'm kind of going to something similar. I mean, it's a group of people, that are not perfect. It's like when you call into customer service, you think that there's, like, this perfect system that they'll be able to solve
Yeah.
my problem, but it's just some teenager on the other end of the line trying to figure it out. They were trained.
Yep.
And with hospitals, it's interesting to kind of open my mind to this a little bit. I'm sure it's probably not as much because you're so experienced with it, but for me to think, like, oh yeah, that they're going to work every day. They're not prophets, they're not, like, all knowing. They're trying to
Right.
figure it out. They have budgets. They have, there's politics likely, and
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
promotions. I mean, I guess I don't know. Like, is there that type of, like, is there, like, not you specifically, but just in the field, is there corruption and politics and promotions and those kinds of things that you find in the corporate world?
Yeah, there's definitely politics. I don't know so much the corruption side of things. For the most part, like, most doctors that I've worked with try and be team players, and try and make the best out of whatever situation we're dealing with. Um, but there's definitely politics. In the Air Force, there's double whammy politics, because you've got kind of two ranks. You've got the Air Force ranking system, and then you've got the medical ranking system.
Right.
But yeah, so there's such thing as like chiefs of I don't know, whatever department, like the chief of dermatology or the chief of surgery or the chief of family medicine. And they don't get paid significantly more, but it does boost them in the political side a lot. It puts a lot of like political money in their bank. Um, Essentially, like, I mean, you can think of it like boosting their resume in that
Mm-hmm.
sense. The and you know, it's funny to watch, especially like cardiologists for the most part, um, are kind of interesting characters, but they like watching people have to deal with each other gets kind of interesting. And there's like a lot of no BS, like no political tactics whatsoever. They just say it on the nose how it is, and um, then change jobs.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of interesting. I don't know. Um, there's a lot that goes into it, and it like I don't know if I was back before medicine or before med school or whatever, if I went to some hospital and I was like seen by the chief of surgery, I would have been like, oh my gosh, I have the best doctor, he's the chief of surgery. And the reality is he's probably the youngest doctor who's trying to boost his resume, who doesn't have nearly as much experience as some of the old doctors that don't want to deal with the administrative whatever that comes with being the chief, because they're essentially like making schedules and developing call systems and stuff like that. They're doing all of the stuff that is not patient care that nobody wants to do, but he's the chief of surgery, so he's really the best. So
Yeah. And that
it's
kind of goes back to what we were saying before, where like if you made it too much of a business, you can kind of pull those strings a little bit easier. Like you
yeah,
could bring patients in and be like, well, you can go to our normal surgeon for $39.99, or our chief of departmental surgery for $59.99, and they're both
right.
great. And like those types of games that corporations play.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I find that very interesting to think about. And if we just let them loose, like like we already kind of talked about it, but the weirdest part of it would be it would become a product, which in some sense I feel like would actually make it uh, probably less expensive and better quality in some sense, but then
Yeah,
also would be so maybe polluted by factors that shouldn't matter. I think
right.
something interesting about the medical field and good is that a certain type of person I feel is attracted to it. Um, and that helps, right? Like you were saying, the doctors you've worked with have been good. Doctors I've ever worked with have always been great. And I think the kind of person who goes to school for that long, is that meticulous, um, in their study, in their daily operations, combined with they care enough about people to actually enjoy that stress and that type of environment. I think that's why there's not quite as much corruption as maybe there could be. Maybe I'm ignorant to it, but it seems like the people have a little bit more altruistic tendencies just to be attracted to the medical field to begin with.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I mean, sitting in on like medical interviews and stuff like that, or med school interviews or med residency interviews, um, you always ask like, why do you want to be a doctor? And like the number one answer that everyone always says is, I just want to help people. And I feel like this is the best way to do that. So I feel like for the most part, that's the game. And if you uh the reality is, if you want to make money, don't be a doctor. you know like, I mean, just playing the numbers game strictly, you'll make more being going to like some trade school, becoming like a plumber, right out of high school, and spending a lifetime of investing that money versus spending an extra 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of medical school, all this time in residency. They pay barely more than minimum wage, essentially. Spend all this time getting to, I guess I shouldn't say minimum wage, more than like the poverty line. But spend all this time getting to the point where you finally get a paycheck. I'm really excited for like next year when I get a real paycheck, you know what I mean? And I've been at it for ever. So
Yeah.
um I don't know. I think like anybody that wants to do it for the money kind of gives up pretty early in the process, realizes that they're not going to make it with like financially, and the best bet is to go into business somewhere.
That's got to be the worst combination, like if you went it for the money, you stick it through, then it's like you don't like what you're doing. You don't have the altruistic, viewpoint, and you're all this debt and time, and
Yeah.
it's a labor of love, I guess, to the extent that you have to be passionate about it. Like a doctor is not an easy route. I think that's a little bit of an old school way of thinking about it. I think maybe when in the 90s or earlier, all doctor, dentist, lawyer was like was seen as prestigious, which it still is. But it was like, I think our generation, a lot of people grew up thinking that that was like the cash cow. Like, hey, if you want to be seen as successful, if you want to be rich, you want to be like high status, be a doctor. And
Yeah.
I really think if you want to be all those things, like, I don't know, be an entrepreneur or like a real estate investor or whatever, but doctor
Yeah.
has the status, but that's not what you should be basing that on. You could get that way easier somewhere else. You should like medicine if you're going to
Yeah.
be a doctor.
Yeah, exactly. I've known one guy personally and one other guy that I knew of, but I don't know why they got into medicine necessarily. I don't think it was for the money per se, but just so miserable. They just hated every minute of it, and I think that's probably pretty accurate with a lot of different careers that you could get into, that you get into it and you're like, oh, you know what? This is not the rainbows and unicorns that I thought it was. The difference is like medical, you have so much time to get to that point. Like
Uh-huh.
you can realize in your first year of medical school, you know what? Like I'm not doing this for the rest of my life.
If you make it to being a doctor and you don't notice, then it's your own fault, probably.
Yeah. Yeah. Then you're pretty much probably well deserved the fact that you're going to be miserable. But yeah,
Well, it's good
I
though.
don't
It's
know.
good to know that you don't have like it weeds people out in a way.
Yeah.
It's good
Yeah.
to know when I go to see a doctor, they had to literally hike through hell to get there. And so they want to be there and they're qualified to be there and they're
Yeah.
passionate.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and you also get to filter where you end up, right? So based on your personality, right? If you're I had a really good friend who is like just this warm teddy bear kind of guy, and he wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon, and he had wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon forever, and he didn't make it, and he scrambled into internal medicine, which is like adult medicine, but pays very, very little compared to an orthopedic surgeon, right? And so he
Mhm.
had this like mentality of who he was going to be, and but he didn't fit the bill. Like he just wasn't a surgeon in the sense that like he loved surgery, he loved operating on people, he loved digging into the anatomy and stuff like that, but he just was too nice. And surgeons have to be like, as rough as it may sound, like surgeons have to be arrogant. They have to be 100% confident that what I'm cutting is a blood vessel that is appropriate, or what I'm cutting is like not going to ruin this person's life, because um people are different, like anatomies are different, and you get into somebody and you realize that everything's all flipped around weird, and you like the decisions you're making, you have to be like, this is the absolute best decision in this 1 second that I have to make this choice, and cut it or don't cut it, and they will live with the consequences for the rest of their life. It takes a really specific personality to be able to handle that, and they're not like the big friendly teddy bear types,
Mm-hmm.
and so when he didn't get in, I was like not surprised at all, but he was devastated. And it just comes down to like, you find your center and you just start praying and you start fasting and you do your best to like, and like he was a member of the church, and you do your best to like find where Heavenly Father wants you to go. And eventually, like, I thought I was supposed to do peds. Like, I love the PICU. I love dealing with critically ill babies that are kids that are could die at any second, or would have died if it hadn't been for the couple of things that we did or whatever. But it wasn't my path, and it took a lot of prayer and a lot of like fasting and a lot of like trusting Heavenly Father to walk me through to where I was supposed to be to get here. And I don't even know what the end of the road is, because I know that I'm happier in this like program than I would have been in just pediatrics. Having like the ability to expand my practice to include like emergency medicine and wilderness medicine and hospital medicine, stuff like that, makes me like, that's what I love. Like, I just really enjoy it. So throwing all of that in there, it just changes where you end up. So my buddy ended up going into gastroenterology, which is not really surgery, but it's, there's like, they're kind of like the poop doctors, basically. If you're not pooping, they'll make you poop, and if you are pooping, they'll make you stop, kind of a thing. But he gets to do like colonoscopies and scopes and all of that stuff, which is it's procedures, so he likes it, and it'll be a little bit better fit for his personality. And I feel like that's kind of, there's so many levels of like sifting as you go through the whole process, that by the time you end up where you are, you've had so many options to like course correct and adjust and find the niche that is going to make you the happiest as you go along. But
I think that's so interesting what you said about the ER surgeons as well, like how it's like the jocks. I think that's so
yeah,
funny and actually makes perfect sense when you said it, because, well, the jock type person, it's like, what's the most um glorified, like intense, in a TV show type thing when you think of doctor, and it's ER, right? Like you
right,
watch House, you watch ER, you watch all these shows, and it's like,
yeah,
I'm the man, and it's high stakes, high pressures. I'm gonna take care of this. So it would make sense
yeah,
you'd have to have that type of personality. But I never thought of that. I just kind of, I mean, I didn't really think about it at all. But I just thought that like people liked medicine, and they just like became, you know, they just eventually drifted into whatever lane. But
yeah,
it makes sense. They're so different. Like the people that are in that type of situation versus the bedside manner you'd need to be pediatrician, or even like when we went in, our nurses and doctors for the pregnancy, it's just a different thing.
yeah, yeah. Or like palliative care, right? It's palliative care is like end of life care. So 90-year-old grandpa comes to the hospital, and the ER doc is going to talk to him in a totally different way than once we get him settled on the floor, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, there's no way you're making it through this, grandpa. Like, let's sit down and have a conversation. Like, no ER doc is going to sit down and say, these are all the things. And like, I'm sorry, let's bring your family and let's have a conversation. Like, let's talk about transition of life and stuff like that. Like, that's not a surgeon's personality for dang sure, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, I mean, you really do filter, but I think the core of it comes down to, like, this is the best way that I can help people with the life that I've been given, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't have a whole lot of time on this earth, and like, I'm going to use it for the best that I can. And um I think part of it too, um because medicine goes so far beyond just doctors, right? There's like researchers, there's biomedicine, there's the we had a neighbor that was like, all he built prostheses, like prosthetic legs and stuff like that. And it all comes down to, like, it filters all the way through medicine. Like, nurses, if you ask any nurse, like, same thing. They just, everybody wants to take care of other people, and like, the way that they can do that and the way that they want to do that, um one, it changes over their lifetime, right? Like, it corrects and adjusts as they go along. So someone who thinks, like, I, at one point, I was going to go in as a nurse practitioner, and then I don't know, life just kind of shifted and I went a different direction. And um it's just, it's amazing to work with that kind of an environment. You know, when there's a global pandemic and people are dying left and right, and we have, I don't know, 10 people in the hospital right now currently, that um so our, statistically, like, we, since in this last year, we've had, I don't know, probably over a dozen, maybe like 2 dozen people come through with COVID that had to be intubated. It was bad enough that they had to have respiratory support, and every single one of them passed away. Like, we've had one guy that just barely made it. He's still in the hospital, but he was successfully extubated. We got the tube out and he's still alive, which hasn't happened yet. Um, like, to go into that environment every day and just like have to, you know, wipe up their spit or change their diapers or go into the room to sweep the floor, like housekeeping and stuff, like everybody, to work in the environment where people are willing to like put themselves out there and put that much on the line to like take care of people who can't take care of themselves and who would otherwise um not have, I don't know, like, COVID is a horrible death. Like, people die horrible deaths from it. Um and being able to work with the people that are willing to do that, like, it changes your perspective, you know, it humbles you and it makes you just want to be better and work harder and do more for the next guy, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But
No, absolutely. That's what I was saying earlier. Like people that are in the medical field, they're already such a subset of personalities from the rest of the world. And so like there's a spectrum. You know, there's going to be good and bad doctors, and there's going to be people that care more and less. But the fact that people made it all the way there and that they're willing to give up their life in a sense, to help other people, to think about other people before themselves, um, that alone kind of separates them from the rest of society. I talked earlier about like the whole shaman mentality, and I joke about it, but it kind of makes sense because most people aren't that way. And so they see a doctor, they see a nurse, and they don't see a reflection of themselves. At least I don't. I'm not like, I could do that. I could sacrifice um, my peace of mind all the time worrying about other people, you know? And so we respect that because our lives are in their hands. It's crazy. Um, why I know that I don't want to take too much of your time. I know you got those little ones back at the RV. Is there anything that I can do or anyone who's listening to this can do to support you or to, you know, is there any way that any message that you want to get out to them or anything like that?
Oh man, I don't
Venmo.
know.
We can just
Yeah,
shoot you.
yeah,
What's your
right.
Venmo?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's the beauty of it. Like, is um we've kind of made the decisions that we've needed to like put ourselves in a position where we can help others instead of um having to necessarily rely on other people taking care of us. We've been in that situation, right? Like we had 4 babies under 2.5 when we started medical school, and we needed help. Like we needed as
Oh,
much help as we could get, and it was really humbling for people to say, what can I do to help? And it's like, actually, could you just like do my dishes, because I'm so tired, you know but um I don't know, honestly. Like the big thing, the saddest thing for me is to see how selfish and how um uncaring uh the world can get sometimes, especially when little kids are involved. Like it's heartbreaking to be in a pediatric unit and have to deal with some of the neglect and abuse that happens to little kids. um so the reality is, like, we all need to come closer to the Savior and find whatever path we can to uh, develop our relationship with Him, um, and pray for the people that need it. Pray for the country. Pray for like everything going on, because essentially, like, I mean, if you look at this insurance versus medical versus um, all the dynamic aspects that we kind of have been talking about, like it's so far out of anybody's hands. you know like if the president of the United States wanted to correct this system like President Obama did, or like Trump tried to reverse, or whatever, it's out of their hands. It's so far beyond like what any individual can manage. Like we do need a like revamping of the medical system. We need to fix it, because there's a lot of bogginess and waste that um doesn't need to be there. But what is the right way to do that? I have no idea. But um every single person can pray and can receive individual inspiration to do what they can, and to find the their way to make society a little better, right? Like to just pick one thing and help somebody um that needs it. And if everybody does that, dude, there's this 90 something year old grandma. We called her Grandma Isaac. And when the twins were born, Hailey couldn't move. Her back was all messed up. And I was in way over my head with school. And this 90 something year old grandma came over to her house and she was like, I'm taking your children. She didn't ask. She didn't say, what can I do to help? She didn't do anything. She said, I'm taking your children. She took all four of our kids over to her house and entertained them for like hours and hours every day for like several weeks.
Oh,
And it was, I mean, it was unbelievable. Like the twins still needed to be fed all the time, like bottles and whatever. And she just did it. She didn't ask, she didn't complain. And oh man, we will forever love Grandma Isaac because of her willingness to just do it and not ask and not what can I do and not wait for somebody to tell me what to do. And honestly, if we had a world full of Grandma Isaacs just jumping in to help other people, like that would change everything, you know, and it would bring, it would make this place the place that we want to live in, you know. um there's so much division and uh people are getting so worked up about everything right now, and there's a whole lot of like, this is what I think is right and this is what you should think is right, and there's not a whole lot of like, I'm going to take your children and we're going to go to the park kind of a thing, you know.
yeah.
So if anybody hears this, that's, just jump in and help somebody.
I love that. That's a great message. And that is actually not something beyond our control. It's something that we can do, we never think to do. And she wasn't trying to be political. She wasn't trying to look good. She's just like, I'm a person, that's a person. They need help. I'll just do something. So I love that. Say hi to your family for me. Say hi to Hailey. If you're ever in Arizona, come on by. I don't know if that's within the radius, but if you are, drop on in. We'd love to see you guys.
Yeah, man, that'd be awesome. It was good talking to you.
Yeah, it was great talking to you. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, no problem. We'll see you later.